The Balkans! Sorry, my inner 8% Serbian started acting up. But yes, the Balkans, the powder keg of Europe, full of the most ethnic diversity of all of the continent. If we ignore the ethnic makeup of Paris, that is. The Balkans includes no less than 6 separate language families, those being Hellenic, which is entirely comprised of the Greeks, Illyric, which includes the Albanians and Kosovars, Balkan Romance, made up of the Daco-Romanians, Istro-Romanians, Meglano-Romanians, and A-Romanians, Balkan Slavic, including Slovenian, Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian, North Macedonian, Bulgarian, and Montenegrin. Turkic, made up of the Turks but also the Gagauz of South Bessarabia. And Finno-Ugric, being Hungarians and Sekers. Sekui? I don't know how to say in English, but Sekui. There are also the Russians and Ukrainians that inhabit parts of Bessarabia and Transnistria, but that's a topic for another day. How this many vastly different groups managed to get along is a separate question, and the answer is no. But more importantly, how on earth did God let this happen? A valid question, one which we have to look back in time for. In the classical era, the Balkans looked a little different. In the south, there are the ancient Greeks, spread between different city-states like Athens, Sparta, Thebes, and Macedon. To their north, there are the Thracians, which took up the area between the Greeks and the Danube River. The Thracians are a Paleo-Balkan group, with ties to the next 2 groups. To the north of the Danube, there are the Dacians, the ancestors of today's Romanians and Moldovans. The Dacians were a subgroup of the Thracians that splintered off and created their own culture. Then, to the west, there are the Illyrians, the ancestors of today's Albanians, another Paleo-Balkan group, likely in the same Sprachbund as the previously mentioned Thracians and Dacians. This situation in the Balkans would last about 1,000 years. Even as empires like the Achaemenids and the Macedonians came and went, it didn't massively change the ethnic makeup of the territory. Until Rome. In the 2nd century BC, the Roman Republic started seeping into the Balkans, conquering from Albania and Croatia east. The Romans started by conquering Greece, following the Macedonian Wars. However, the Romans viewed the Greeks extremely positively, and would not only allow the Greeks to continue their traditions and language, but actually helped spread the Greek culture throughout the rest of the Roman Empire. The Jędrek line is a metaphorical line that historians use to show the dominance of the Greek language versus the Latin language as the lingua franca of the Roman Empire in the Balkans. North of the line, the Latin language was widely spoken. Meanwhile, to the south, it was predominantly Greek that was spoken. It was this Roman admiration that allowed Greek to continue rather untouched onwards to the next era. North of the Greeks, the nearby Illyrians were also quickly conquered, although spread between both sides of the Jędrek line made them gain many Greek and Latin influences. This split nature of Illyrian would continue to shine into the present as the Albanian language continues to be split between 2 dialects. However, as a majority of Illyrians were under the Latin domination, over time the Latin language would permeate more and more into the Illyrian and later Albanian languages, with modern-day Albanian having 60% of its vocabulary coming from Latin. The Romans would create many colony cities, mainly on the Dalmatian coast, but all the way across Thracia and north to Pannonia. But the rest of the territory would remain different types of ethnicities for a while. While most would speak Latin as the lingua franca of the territory, they still spoke their native language, although over time the ethnicities would assimilate to become more and more Roman. Then, following the Dacian Wars, the Romans conquered Dacia and incorporated it into the empire, rapidly assimilating the Dacians to keep control over the territory north of the Danube. They would go all in on the colonies idea and force as much of the Dacian population as possible to live in Roman colonies, while destroying most previously existing Dacian cities and transplanting a massive amount of Romans from the rest of the empire to live in the province, which worked to rapidly Romanize Dacia faster than the rest of the Balkans. The map of the Balkan ethnicities at this point looked something like this, and would stay mostly the same until the fall of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Byzantine Age. Although along the way Rome pulled out of Dacia during the crisis of the 3rd century, splitting the Daco-Romans between the one that stayed in Dacia and the ones who left to go south. And I know, Romanian history is complicated and divisive, but we just did 3 videos on Romania, so I won't get too much into it here. But I swear, I'll make a whole video discussing Dacian-Romanian continuity in the future, okay? For now, just leave your evidence for why I'm wrong in the comments. I do read it all. It also helps to boost the algorithm. That was good. During the Byzantine Age, the Slavs began to show up and do some shenanigans in the Balkans. Coming from north of the Balkans, likely originating initially in modern-day Poland around the Vistula, but could have been more east. The Slavs would migrate into the Balkans, maybe to avoid the Avar, Gothic, Gepid, Visigothic, Hunnic domination, maybe because it was safer in the Byzantine Empire, maybe to raid the empire, maybe for shits and giggles, who knows? Point being that they came, they saw, and they conquered. And by conquered, I mean they just settled down and started farming like no one minded. And for the most part, no one did. The Byzantines were kinda busy with everything else, and the Slavs were just coming in and taking unsettled areas in the empire to start farming. So it was kinda a win-win for everyone. Following the 570s, the Slavs started being a bit more aggressive in their methods, so the Byzantines were forced to react militarily. Although it didn't really work out because the Slavs were so numerous and so disorganized. So they moved to the good old-fashioned Roman method. They resettled them throughout the empire. This mostly worked as the Slavs they resettled into Anatolia and beyond lost their ethnic identity. Although the Slavs in the Balkans were still more numerous than any other ethnicity that could be found there, and they reached from Pannonia all the way south to the Aegean Sea, where the Slavs tried raiding into the Greek islands. A statement so cursed I couldn't believe when I first read it. The Slavs were extremely efficient at assimilating their new neighbors, to the point that even as far south as Greece, the Greek population was turned Slavic, and many city names throughout Greece were permanently changed into Slavic names that still persist to this day. The Byzantines would, as soon as they finished putting out all the other fires, turn back to the Balkans in order to save mainland Greece, moving in many Greeks from other parts of the empire, like Sicily and Anatolia, to re-Greekify mainland Greece after the Slavs. However, the rest of the Balkans were not spared the Slavic assimilation, as the Thracians stopped existing as an ethnic group, and the Romano-Dacians fled to the Carpathian and Balkan mountains to avoid the Slavic migrations. Meanwhile, the Illyrians were pushed into the mountains around modern-day Albania. In the 7th century, our favorite war criminals showed up in the Balkans, the Serbs and Croatians. They settled in roughly the area that they still occupy today, and managed to unite the Slavs in their area to their banner. The Serbs and Croats are said to have come from White Serbia and White Croatia, which claim to be in modern-day East Germany and Poland. If they exist or not, I don't know. I'm sure the nationalists will let me know, though. At this point, the Slavic languages formed a dialect continuum, meaning that languages that are geographically proximate are mutually intelligible, but the further you go, the less languages can be understood. Around 630 AD, the Bulgars under Kubrat revolted against the Avars in modern-day East Ukraine and established Old Great Bulgaria. Although the Bulgars were not Slavic at all, being Turkic instead, they would be the ancestors of today's Bulgarians. Following Old Great Bulgaria being split between the sons of Kubrat, the sons would all take a portion of the population of Bulgars and go different ways. Man, what is it with Slavs and having different brothers each go a different direction to form an ethnic group? Anyway, one of Kubrat's sons, Asparuh, went to the Balkans and had a bit of a tussle with the Byzantines, whereby he won and created the First Bulgarian Empire. The Bulgars would also become victims of the Slavic assimilation, as they lost their Turkic language and many other customs to instead become Slavs, only keeping their name. Heya, Future Spectre here. After some digging I found that the old Bulgar language might have actually survived in Volgo, Bulgaria, one of the spots Kubrat's sons went to, where the language is now known as Chuvash. This does, however, throw some wrenches into some theories about the Gagauz, which we'll talk about in a bit, because Chuvash is an Oguric Turkic strata, and not an Oguzic Turkic language like Gagauz, which makes the Gagauz less likely to be the old Bulgars, like I theorized. At the same time, some Western Slavs went south, as the Southern Slavs, specifically the Croatians, went north, and both settled the area of modern-day Slovenia, giving us a unique blend of languages that would become everyone's favorite femboy land. By the 9th century, the Frankish Empire spread its control to the Balkans, taking over Croatia as Dalmatia was annexed and Croatian Pannonia became a vassal. The Franks would spread Catholicism throughout these areas along with the Latin script. Meanwhile, in the rest of the Balkans, the Orthodox influence of the Byzantines would dominate, as the Byzantines forced the Bulgarian Empire to convert to Orthodoxy. Interestingly, the Serbs were first Christianized under the Roman Church, but were turned to Constantinople later when the Byzantines demanded that religious dominion correlate with political boundaries. The Bulgarians would also create the Cyrillic script in order to spread the Orthodox religion with their own missionaries instead of the Byzantine Roman ones. In the 9th century, the Hungarians moved on in, taking over the Carpathian Basin for themselves. Initially settling to the east of the Carpathians, they had moved to the west and settled on Pannonia after some altercations with the Pechenegs. The Hungarians came from the land of the North Urals, the border between Europe and Asia, probably being one of the first Finno-Ugric groups to separate from the rest that would go on to become the Finns and Estonians. They would go south, and likely interacted with Iranians, Turks, Pechenegs, Huns, and who knows what other groups, where they got influenced by them, and kept some of the influences on language and culture. The Hungarians, when they showed up in Europe, conquered themselves a kingdom around the Carpathian Basin, from the First Bulgarian Empire, whereby they quickly made themselves a regional power, mostly butting heads with the Moravian and Frankish empires. The Mongols would also show up in the Balkans for a bit, but they would eventually retreat, whereby the Hungarians moved to make themselves some cushions on the other side of the Carpathians, by sending some of those weird Romano-Dacians in Transylvania to set up clan kingdoms, now known as Vlachs. Although these groups would revolt and found the Romanian principalities. The ethnic map of the Balkans probably looked something like this at this point. Almost modern day, but we're still missing one group which would greatly influence the peninsula. The Turks. Originating in the far east areas of Asia, the Turks would pester China for a few hundred years, until eventually migrating west, whereby, after some shenanigans, the Seljuk Turks would become the conquerors of Persia, before moving west again and trying to conquer what was left of the Roman Empire. The Turks, however, would be stopped by the Mongols, who shattered what was left of the Seljuks, before a tiny, insignificant state in Anatolia would slowly begin regaining Turkish power. The Ottomans. From here, the Ottomans would conquer the rest of the Byzantine Empire, conquering Constantinople in 1453, and then going to dominate the entire Balkans. During this time, the Ottomans heavily recommended switching your religion to Islam. It was during this time, then, that not only did the Ottomans settle a bunch of Turks throughout the Balkans, but also converted parts of the Slavic and Albanian population to becoming Muslim. And there we get the birth of the modern Bosnian nation. Yes, I know there was a kingdom of Bosnia before this. It was in 1114 AD. But that was a state that came to be from the collapse of Serbia. From this point on, there can be no denying that these are an ethnically unique population. Yes, I know there was also a kingdom of Bosnia in 1377 AD, but shh, we don't have all year for me to list all the kingdoms of the Balkans. Although we're not quite done with the Turks yet, as we still have the Gagauz to talk about. Remember those random tribes the Slavs might have been running from? Well, that list also includes many Turkic tribes, such as the Pechenegs, the Cumans, and the Kipchaks. All these groups came and went through the territory of modern-day Romania. However, some of them stayed and managed to hold on to their ethnic identity through more waves of migration. Although there are also competing theories that they are either Bulgarians or Greeks that were Turkified. We know that they likely predate the Ottoman Empire, thanks to the existence of a long-held Orthodox tradition, but as for which Turkic group they descend from, we don't really know. My personal favorite theory is that the Gagauz are the old Bulgars, who didn't get melded into the Slavic ethnicity. This comes mainly from how there are a large number of ethnic Bulgarians in South Bessarabia, and some evidence that the Gagauz used to refer to themselves as Hasli Bulgar, or true Bulgarians, and Eski Bulgar, or old Bulgarians. But that is just a theory. Over time, the Ottoman Empire began to lose strength and influence in the Balkans, as the Russians and Austrians increased their influence in the region. This increased domination from the Germanic and Slavic powers left a lot of influence on parts of the region, such as the Transylvanian Saxons and the Russians and Ukrainians of Transnistria, Bukovina, and Bessarabia. Then in the 1900s, the Balkans finally start to receive the title of the Florida of Europe, starting with a bang in the Balkan Wars, as everyone started acting like Twitter users and killing any neighbors that had a different opinion than them. Then a Serbian guy in Bosnia shot a German guy who was the heir of Austria, which got Austria to declare war on Serbia, which got Russia involved, which got Germany involved, which got France involved, which meant that Germany got Belgium involved, which got Britain involved, and hey! Would you look at that? We're at war. World War I and the Balkan Wars did allow for the creation of many independent nations in the Balkans, from the crumbling Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman empires. The Albanians got independence. Bulgaria became independent, then bigger, and then smaller again. Greece got bigger, but still no Constantinople. Romania got back Transylvania, and Serbia started collecting ethnicities like Pokemon. This was thanks to a certain pan-Slavic idea that some people had after World War I, where they thought it'd be a great idea to slam together 6 different flavors of schizophrenic, along with Albanians, Romanians, Hungarians, and Lord knows what else into one country and hope it works out. As if Austria-Hungary didn't teach us this exact lesson a couple years beforehand. Regardless, 60 years later, after the one-man state that is Tito died, Yugoslavia exploded and set off the Yugoslav Wars of the 90s, which resulted in some sus stuff. I can't really elaborate here. Point being that all the ethnicities of Yugoslavia each wanted a larger slice of that territorial pie, and as such started ensuring that the regions they wanted were devoid of any other ethnicities that might disagree. While the Serbs get most of the flack for this, because they happen to be the best at it, the Bosnians and Croatians also did similar things. Oops, there's some ethnic cleansing. While all of this was happening, the North Macedonians and the Slovenians separated more peacefully. While the core countries of Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia all speak practically the same language and only have differences regarding religion, which is definitely a less touchy subject, the Slovenians, as we mentioned earlier, are a whole separate linguistic anomaly, thanks to being part Southern and part Western Slavic, along with having a ton of Germanic influences on the language, and especially the culture. It's also all of this that lends to the idea that Slovenes are more feminine and soft. So that's how we got the femboy memes. Then, North Macedonia has a language more similar to Bulgarian than Serbo-Croatian, and as such was allowed to leave more easily. The Macedonians also sometimes claim lineage to the Macedonian Empire of Alexander the Conqueror, but that's a pretty silly lark, North Macedonia, I'm not even gonna lie. This led to Greece stirring up a fuss to not allow North Macedonia to join NATO, until they changed the name of the country to add that North in there. Bulgarians sometimes also claim that North Macedonians aren't real, and are just Serbanized Bulgarians. Which, look, I'm sorry North Macedonians, you really need some better PR. Also, Montenegro. Probably slept through the Serbian call to arms. They left Yugoslavia peacefully after. Also, Moldova escaped the Soviet hellhole around this time. Go see the Romania history video for more on that. Then, finally, there's this. Do I gotta talk about it? Kosovo, which is a disputed territory, attempted to bounce out of Serbia, but Serbia didn't let them, due to the cultural significance that Kosovo has on the Serbian psyche. The territory is ethnically mostly Albanian, but historically significant to the Serbs, and as such is a bit of a sticking point in the modern day. Although, realistically, Serbia holds no real power over Kosovo, which is, if we're gonna be honest, pretty autonomous. Although it isn't recognized by many countries, even in Europe, such as Spain and Romania. What is it with you two always coming up in these videos? So, what can we say about this region of chaos, in which all sanity and hope evaporate? Well, we've learned that like all things, it's complicated. The Balkans have a long and winding history, with multiple groups holding sway over them for periods of time, each leaving their own prints on the region. Which, over time, has worked to leave the peninsula as an extremely diverse place, full of different cultures, religions, languages, nationalities, and uniqueness not found anywhere else on this lovely continent. But above all, remember, we must secure the fatherland for the glory of the nation. Let us remove the heretics from our land. Kosovo jet Serbia!